Hello, everyone, and welcome to Rapid Value Realization with an Agentic Skill Stacking Approach. What a mouthful of a title, but I promise you, at the end of this session, you'll be understanding how and why you'll be getting value from simple AI agents. Feel free to post any questions that you have as we go along. I will do my best to answer them. Also, post in the chat where you're joining from. Let's get this participation going. Also, anytime you see a nice animation, because Lord knows I've spent mountains of time doing them, send some fire emojis in the chat. Micah Smith is kindly donating dollars for each fire emoji that appears. So go nuts. There we go. Micah, open that wallet. So before we begin, safe harbor. So this presentation is going to include some forward-looking statements about our products, about our vision, and we're super excited about all of these possibilities, but I have to remind you that actual development, release timing will always be at Automation Anywhere's discretion. So think of this as a glimpse into our thinking and where we see agentic process automation heading. So my name is Ollie Morris. You know this, you signed up for this session. I'm a developer evangelist at Automation Anywhere, and I've actually been in automation for about 11 years now, and 6 of which have been spent at Automation Anywhere. 6 years as of yesterday, my 6th-year anniversary here. I started off in professional services, working with some of our biggest customers, helping them in shape and develop their COEs, troubleshoot automations, and yeah, it's been an incredible journey seeing how all of you go about building bots and now making the transition to intelligent automation and now hopefully agentic process automation as well. I moved into customer success after a few years in professional services, so I got the chance to work super closely and in depth with even more of our biggest accounts. And now I find myself in the community and learning team, loving every minute. So my aim for this year is to support and enable you in building your first agentic process automations. And I know if there was a puke emoji in the chat, you'd all be putting that in there because it's pretty cheesy, but I mean it. I see this as the next wave of huge value driving automation, and I couldn't be more excited for it. Great to see everyone joining from all over. Amazing. I hope you find this session great. For those of you that have just joined, feel free to throw any questions into the chat and I'll do my best to answer them as I go, if that makes sense too. Equally, we have the Ask the Speaker option as well in the chats. We have moderators who will be putting those questions to me as well. So yeah, keep it coming. And as I said, fire emojis equals a bonus for Ollie Morris, courtesy of Micah Smith. So let's get into the objectives of the session. So by the end of this presentation, you will understand the capabilities of agents. You will recognize how they fit into new and existing automations. You will be able to identify processes where agents can deliver quick and meaningful value. And you'll be gaining an overview of something that we're calling the AI enablement framework, which we are super excited to bring to you. Now, aligning this to the new Pathfinder framework, which Micah Smith presented in the keynote yesterday, which is aimed at helping organizations navigate the complexities of a modern COE. My presentation today will be touching on opportunity identification and pipeline management, and also operating model and delivery. In truth, I could have drawn a red box around all of these sections. I think we'll be touching on every single one, but primarily it will be those 2 that we've highlighted. Now, it's important, before I go prattling on about agentic this, tools that, agents this, we need to do some grounding in terminology. So, agentic process automation. I want to be clear that when I say APA or agentic process automation, what I'm referring to is the framework for automating complex, multi-step processes within your organization by orchestrating intelligent agents and tools to achieve business outcomes, business value, with appropriate controls and guardrails. And controls and guardrails are quite brightly highlighted there. And AI agents. So these are systems that will be used to coordinate the use of tools. And I'll be getting to tools just very shortly. It's coordinating tools to accomplish objectives with varying levels of autonomy. And what I mean by autonomy is they could be operating by simply doing basic analysis and sort of predefined or almost determined, I should say, contextual reasoning, all the way through to just complete goal completion as well. And then we get into tools. So tools are objects that have discrete capabilities that can be leveraged by agents. So applying that to an automation anywhere perspective, we have task bots, API tasks, processes, AI skills, and if you use document automation, it could be learning instances as well. And I want to pause and take us back and let's have a think about how we've traditionally built RPA bots. And I'm not talking our big end-to-end automations. I'm thinking bots in particular. They've predominantly done one thing and one thing only, or at least they should have done if you've been following the single responsibility principle. So a common example, which I might see across customer support organizations, would be you've built a bot that will synchronize, say, customer contact details. So making sure the customer, if they've changed their email address or maybe they've got married and changed their name, those details are up to date, their mobile numbers reflected. That's certainly something we do at Automation Anywhere to make sure that we're contacting you with the right details. You may also have a bot in customer support that will send an automatic follow-up to a customer. Hey, we haven't heard a response from you. Is this ticket resolved? Or we prompted you to respond with some logs so we could evaluate the ticket. We haven't heard anything. Or equally, it might be a response back to someone in customer support to say, hey, to let you know you're about to breach the SLA with the customer. You kind of need to respond to them. And then if they fail, they will typically do so gracefully and then just stop. So they've been rules-based. They've been singularly task-focused, and they've all relied on structured data. So how does this differ to AI agents? Well, the advent of generative AI has enabled automations to really, for the first time, start leveraging AI at scale. And AI agents represent a complete evolution beyond what we saw previously with RPA bots. And the three key features that they possess are autonomy, adaptability, and awareness. And what I mean by autonomy is they're capable of making decisions by themselves. They're capable of being proactive. In fact, you'll have probably seen that OpenAI have started to, I think, are just rolling out now a task feature to ChatGPT where it's possible for it to ping you and be proactive. So we're starting to see more of that open up. They can determine when to call on a human. In terms of adaptability, well, they can work with different formats of data. They can be multimodal. It could be text, it could be voice. And they can adjust to changes in the environment or data, and they can also work with exceptions incredibly well. Now, from an awareness perspective, they understand context like nothing that we've ever seen before. They can decide what tools to call and when, and they maintain a holistic view of the overall goal of the process, providing you've got a solid enough prompt. But what I want to say is this is not about RPA versus agents. It should not be thought of as that. So you've created an army of incredibly powerful automations already, perhaps using RPA. So these could be harnessed as tools in an AI agent solution. If we go back to my grounding slide, which broke out exactly what tools are, you've built a whole army of them. So whenever I see all these LinkedIn posts of RPA is dead, long live agentic process automation, I know that person has not thought deeply enough or perhaps isn't informed about how agentic process automation will be deployed in an enterprise organization. So don't for one second think that everything you've built and worked hard for is lost. Far from it. And the other thing, which really winds me up, you can tell this is someone who spent too much time on LinkedIn reading people's posts. I'm going to be controversial and say, I don't think there's such a thing as a generative AI use case. So sure, there's capabilities of generative AI that can be used to automate, but generative AI covers everything from content generation to classification to decision making. It's like saying, oh, that's a great human use case. Well, we can do countless things. So it's such a broad statement that to me, it has no meaning. So throughout this deck, we'll be breaking out the capabilities of generative AI and AI agents so you know why they're uniquely valuable to specific use cases. But let me say, so whilst I might have a bee in my bonnet about people saying, oh, there's no such thing as a generative AI use case, there are definitely, of course, there are use cases that are going to be transformed by AI agents. And the best way to do this is to think about the capabilities which they have, which can be harnessed. So we have classification. And what do I mean by classification? Assigning a label or a category to something. It could be sorting emails. It could be categorizing support tickets, detecting that actually what the customers said about this being a category of a bot error actually isn't. It could be a control room error instead. We have sentiment analysis, so determining the emotional tone behind a piece of content. Wow, this support ticket Ollie's written is bad. He's pretty angry. I need to be really careful with the tone with which I respond to him. Or named entity recognition and extraction. So maybe we're extracting key entities from documents like names, locations, and dates. And if you did the document automation training camp, you'll have seen how we used a generative AI learning instance to be able to extract things from contracts or leases. We have data transformation, so changing the format of data to fit a specific structure. So this could be formatting data into maybe a JSON format, so it could easily go to an API endpoint. We have summarization. So perhaps we're summarizing a complex support ticket into a singular sentence or maybe even a paragraph to then pass on to another person. Personally, one of my favorite things to try and make myself feel smart is to upload a big scientific paper to ChatGPT and ask it to explain it to me like I'm 5. We also have language translation, fairly obvious, we don't need to explain that. Content generation, this could be from producing marketing copy for ads or maybe generating content for slides that are being presented at Pathfinder Summit. Of course, I didn't do that. And then we have decision making, so recommending the next best action for a customer based on context and perhaps knowledge as well. And whilst these stand out as singular capabilities, don't ignore the fact that stacking these collectively are incredibly powerful. Decision making combined with maybe named entity recognition and data transformation. If I think of that from a support ticket context, maybe transforming a customer's data into a JSON format to hit your knowledge base, to pull out an interesting article which might solve their problem, passing that to the decision-making capability and for it to decide, yep, let's send this to the customer, can be hugely powerful. So thinking of how we stack these capabilities is huge. So I'm going to stick with my customer support example. And let's think about maybe a customer support department that might exist today. These little blue circles with orange bits, these might be automations that have already exist in the automation success platform. So you've got this data synchronization piece that I touched on earlier, where you're updating a customer's details or maybe information about a customer's environment, like they've just migrated to Windows 10 servers. So you're updating that and reflecting that in your ServiceNow or Salesforce. And then you've got your automated follow-up bot as well. But ultimately, that leaves a ton of stuff which the customer support agent still does. So they're reading tickets, they're diagnosing issues, they're researching issues as well. Okay, based on what this customer has said in this error message, I'm going to search that in our knowledge base, and actually maybe this is a proxy issue, or maybe this is about the high time they upgraded the platform. They might then be routing tickets to level 3 or level 4 engineers if it's particularly difficult. And of course, they'll be updating tickets as well. So we can actually map everything that customer support person does, everything that's in their existing workload, to the 8 capabilities which I presented on a couple of slides. So let's think of reading tickets. What generative AI capabilities are made up in that? Well, it's probably going to be sentiment analysis for a start. Okay, this customer's really angry. They're really unhappy with this. Maybe it's third ticket of the week where they've seen this error. So we need to be mindful of that when responding to them. Could also be translation as well, and not necessarily just translating from one language to another. It could be technical jargon translation. So breaking that down into terms which everyone that reads the ticket can understand. Diagnosing issues. We could be extracting key information from this ticket. So maybe when someone sent this support ticket, they're referencing another ticket where they've seen this happen before, or maybe they're referencing the specific version of the product that they're using. And of course, we'll be classifying this too, saying actually, does this category which they've the customers classified as, does this make sense? Is it a control room issue? Actually, maybe it's a proxy or server issue on the customer side. And of course, every support person worth their salt will be researching the issue. So that will be maybe taking the named entity recognition and extraction values and putting that into JSON format before it goes into an API. In crude terms, for a human, that's probably going to be copying stuff from the support ticket and pasting it into the UI of another application, maybe before summarizing it as well. What we'll typically see in a support org, there might be someone that triages the tickets or does an initial assessment to determine if this can be resolved. And actually, if it can't be, then they will escalate and it will move up the chain, L2, L3, L4, etc. Routing tickets, that would be classification. This looks like an L3 issue. And they'll be making a decision to escalate that as well. Finally, when it comes to updating tickets, you'll of course be summarizing everything that's gone on so far, typically before you would pass that over to someone else. In our support function automation anywhere, we have what's called a follow the sun type approach, whereby one team will hand over to another team to make sure that the customer is getting full 24/7 support. So typically at the handover, they will do a summary of what's happened. And they would also be generating content, as in formatting a reply to the customer to keep them abreast of what's happening. So everything that this customer support person might do in this org could be mapped to a generative AI capability. So this would lead us to a situation where, with a bit of thinking, we could start deploying specific agents which group these skills together. So perhaps we have a diagnosis agent, and I appreciate these names actually, playing them back, don't sound particularly interesting. So challenge to everyone in the chat, think of a better name for a diagnosis agent. So they'd be translating the ticket from jargon or even from Japanese or Spanish into a common language. They'd be classifying the ticket and they'd be researching the solution. And perhaps sitting under this diagnosis agent would be all of the tools that enable this to happen. So it might be AI skills, which are called as part of an API task, which sit within your process composer. You might then also have a routing agent. This would be an agent which would loop in experts. Perhaps there's someone in the support team who is a master of all things related to proxies. So you see the word proxy, we might want to loop this person in to get involved and to provide some support. And also we'd want this routing agent to provide a summary. Here's all the steps that we've tried, proxy expert, over to you. And then we could further stack the agents, perhaps with a ticketing agent. So an agent that would update the customer. These are all the steps that we've tried so far. This is the next plan of action. Or please see this KB article. This is how it solves it. As a result of this, we're going to close this ticket and update it. So if we were to think of this from a high level and a holistic agentic state, we might end up with something like this. So we might be goal focused now instead of task focused. Because of what agentic automation opens up to us, we can genuinely start thinking about lofty goal-based expectations, such as, why don't we aim to try and close 90% of all tickets within 48 hours? And in order to do that, we'll have our automation layer, which will be comprised of the the two bots that I mentioned earlier, contact updates, automated follow-ups, coupled or married with the 3 agents. And then in the middle of that would be our human in the loop layer. So we would still have the customer support person. They would very much sit above all of this. They, of course, are the experts. They have complete oversight. So they would still be integral to making this a successful automation. They would be able to step in at any point and just have overview, maybe assessing or doing an audit on a percentage sample of customer support tickets. Now, does this spell the end of the customer support person? I'm sure that's what some people would be thinking. No, absolutely not. They would be retaining control. They would be the human in the loop. They're the expert. That knowledge doesn't just disappear. They can react and see things which an LLM perhaps can't, because they have an overall view of not just their support function, but also what new products are coming out, and therefore what challenges potential customers might see. So essentially, the generative AI components would act as a digital assistant or a digital customer support person. So, Ollie, you've just spent 20 slides setting the scene. Let's get to the punchline. This is what we signed up for. So how do we identify processes for AI agents? So in the short term, I want you to start small and work from the bottom up. So think of all the automations that you've built that lead to a singular output. I reckon a good 50% of any bot which I built ended up with an Excel or a CSV report at the end of it. Or think about automations that maybe fetch data from a system and saved it somewhere else. For those automations, I'm willing to bet that when you built them, you just looked at how the parts of the process were done and you automated them as they were. And that's fundamentally because we were somewhat constrained by the technology of our time. We knew that automation could only follow basic rules and work with structured data. But I would urge you now to look through your bot inventory or your bot catalog and think, what generative AI capabilities could we now harness in these automations? So all of those reports, which those bots will throw out at the end, guarantee there will be a person that will be looking at those reports and will be making a decision off the back of that. And I say this because I started off life as an accountant, and we love running Excel reports. We had, we could set schedules that would run them so that when we got into the office, we could just, go and use them right away. They weren't very impressive, but we did. But I would use those reports, then write a summary about what's happened from the previous month and compare the financial performance to the budget. So I could then prepare for my meeting with the CEO and explain why my part of the business wasn't doing as well as I could. That's a great use case for generative AI. So look through what you've built so far. What's the output from that? If it's an Excel report, think, what do people in the business do with that report? Perhaps they're classifying, they're summarizing, or they're extracting data before making a decision further down the line. And therein lies a fantastic opportunity for generative AI. Longer term, did everyone see that transition? That's got to be worth some fire emojis in the chat. Let's get Micah Smith sweating on the bonus that he's paying me at the end of it. And that's it. So longer term, let's focus on some of these loftier goals and objectives. So a couple of slides ago, I had that extreme goal of how can we close 90% of support tickets in 48 hours or less. Now I'll caveat this and say I would keep this in my head. I wouldn't be outwardly saying this, but taking that as an example, if I was thinking internally of how could I achieve that goal, and I was to put my management consultant hat on, I'll be downloading all of the support tickets for last year, breaking them down by category, by subcategory, probably by customer type and persona, and trying to break down exactly what's causing certain tickets to be greater than 48 hours or less. And we know we don't need to be rocket scientists to say that it's probably because those questions are pretty complex. And they're likely going up to our level 3 and our level 4 people. So it's kind of being part of the food chain because it's really complicated. So if we were to answer that question, it would most likely be, we need to make sure that tickets get to L3 or L4 as quickly as possible. And we need to make sure that when it does get to these people, that the time that they're spending on those tickets is time well spent. It's time that allows them to focus on thought work rather than administration. So what I would suggest is working from a lofty goal such as this and work out what are all the individual tasks that take place when we go to trying to close a support ticket. And we know within that we will be seeing all sorts of the AI capabilities, which we've covered previously, from generating content and responses to making a decision to researching knowledge base articles and testing with the customer whether they've tried them or not. There's a whole host of things that we could be doing and prompting the customer for before it ever then makes it to our ultimately constrained resources, which will be our senior engineers. So how do we go from idea to live with AI agents? That's the next question, right? I can tell that's what we're all thinking about. So you've identified opportunities for agents, and you've got to this stage where you've determined the type of problem that you're going to solve. So researching solutions to customer support tickets. You know, from a technology perspective, well, this is probably going to need API tasks and AI skills because we're working with Salesforce or perhaps ServiceNow. But at this early stage, there's still going to be a host of questions that you'll have outstanding. Type and technology are only part of the solution. We've got to be thinking about what role will our users play in the finished automation. There might be a human in the loop element. And what are the governance requirements for a solution such as this? We can't just unleash generative AI into our support function and it potentially hallucinates all sorts of slightly strange problems to solutions to customers' technical problems. And then how will we measure the business impacts? How will we be able to prove to the rest of the organization and to our senior leaders that our solution is saving money and improving customer satisfaction and ultimately leading to better outcomes? And then above all else, how should we communicate this capability that we've created? If we've built something which potentially extracts data from a customer support ticket, then goes and queries a knowledge base, and then goes and sends a pretty sensible reply to a customer, that is something that the rest of the business and the rest of the organization should be aware of. So we should be thinking about all of this from day one. We should be thinking about this before we've even started. And this is where the AI enablement framework will come in. And I've put a big beta flag next to this because we will be fleshing this out in much more detail come the AI training camp, which will be hopefully launching in a few months' time. And we've broken this down by capability and also by use case. So for the AI capability, we're thinking of type. So what is the type of problem that I'm solving? So if we consider the previous examples that we talked about earlier, we might be thinking of categorization. Is this really a control room issue? Maybe it's a bot development issue, or maybe it's just a proxy issue altogether. We'd also need to be thinking about technology. So how are we going to power this solution? So we can confidently say that we're going to need a large language model for mostly all of this, but we may also need to think about how we're going to have implement human in the loop technology as well. And then we get onto the role of talent and the role of users. So what skills would our developers need? What training will be needed for humans who are leveraging this solution? And what traits will be required for subject matter experts who are involved in the testing and the feedback of this capability early on? We then need to think about governance and standards as well. So there's obvious risks and controls that will be required for any AI capability. So how will we ensure that the data is classified correctly when we're ultimately testing the solution? And then there's the potentially huge issue of monitoring the solution as well and making sure that the capability is doing exactly what it says it will do, and also to make sure that we're managing the business impact as well and capturing that, and we're able to present that and share that regularly with those in the organization. And then there's finally adoption enablement, which I touched on earlier about how we're communicating this for the benefit of the rest of the organization. Now, we should also be thinking about this from a use case perspective as well. So how do we explain this type of problem? So for every use case, we should be thinking about how we explain the problem we're solving and how it ties into perhaps our bigger, sort of more strategic goal, which I had on a couple of slides ago. We should also be assessing the use case and creating a roadmap. So quite obviously, the use case will be evaluated before we build, but we should also be forecasting what value we expect to deliver, how soon we can get the solution live. Is it reusable? How do we democratize this to other parts of the business so they can potentially reuse this as well? And then pilot and expand. So build it, make tests for it, test it and roll it out across the organization. If we built something which classifies a support ticket, perhaps this could be used in our contact center to classify customer issues over the phone as well. I do just want to say on the aspect of reusability, I think it was certainly something which came very late into my thinking when I was in professional services, in that we very much focused on just getting the customer live with a solution. Probably one of my biggest learnings was I wished I'd stressed early on enough to just think about reusability. Spending an extra couple of days on building something that could be reused, but just making it just a better abstraction of the underlying application, allowing reusability, would have opened up the COE to perhaps go and speak to other elements of finance that much quicker than what they did. And I would urge everyone not to make the same mistake when you're exploring agentic process automation. So what type of problem are we solving? So for the purposes of all things I'm going to be talking about over the next couple of slides, we're going to be thinking about classification. So when I'm saying classification regarding a support ticket, I'm potentially deciding if the category that the user has assigned to the support ticket is correct. So if you raise the support ticket with Automation Anywhere, you say, oh, it's related to document automation, and it's maybe related to the validator. What happens if a customer labels it incorrectly is our support team would read it and be like, actually, that's not document automation at all. That's actually Copilot. So that then has to get reclassified, and it then needs to get routed to other experts. So this can be really, really important to making sure that customers are getting a much faster and a more accurate response as well. So once we're clear on the type of problem we're solving, we can then begin to think about how to solve it. So in this case, I would say for whatever potential problem you're looking at, think about it. Where does it fit amongst these 8 skills? And it might not be one, it might be a couple of them. And then we can start moving on to how will we think about solving the problem. So let's think broadly about classification, how we can use that to solve problems. Well, pretty obviously, we're going to need a bot or an API task of some sort to go and fetch data. So we'd be fetching that support ticket perhaps from ServiceNow, perhaps from Salesforce. And we would be sending that in to our model with instructions. And as you've seen on a couple of demos so far in Pathfinder Summit, using model connections and then pairing it with AI skills, you can super easily do this and test it. So you'd send all that data over to the model with instructions. Perhaps you're providing all the possible categories that a support ticket could be. And perhaps those categories are also dynamically linked via APIs as well. So it's you're ultimately creating a solution that you will never need to update. The model would then classify that data and then pass out the output of its classification. So maybe at a high level, you're thinking about how you would solve the problem with technology. Before you're moving on to talent and who will be involved in this solution. So potentially think about the personas. So you'd have the developer who ultimately builds it. You'd have the end user who will be perhaps the recipient or beneficiary of this technology. And then you might also have a tester as well. So that might be a subject matter expert. So they will be involved in determining whether this solution is fit for purpose. So from a developer perspective, you'd be thinking about the skills that they need. And this would be shaped by It's ultimately the technology solution that's employed. If you're using something with API tasks for the first time, well, dang it, you're going to need to go on the Automation Anywhere University and look for all the courses that Max has done on API tasks. But for end users, they might need something completely different. They might need to know how to use Automation Copilot and get a little bit more familiar with human in the loop and how that would work. And then maybe for testers, a deeper understanding of the current solution and the end goal would be required. And you might need to incorporate LLMs to perhaps enable them in that solution. But then we move on to governance and standards, and how do we manage risk and adhere to them? So for this, I like to think about technology-specific rules and risks and standards that the capability will need. So the big risk will inevitably be accuracy. And I'm trying my best not to say the dreaded H word as we go through this presentation. So how can we make sure that the classification model is accurate? Perhaps we need to enforce something which is called F1 scoring, which is a model's balance between precision and recall. So precision being, out of all the items that the model is labeled as positive, how many were actually positive? Recall, out of all the items that were truly positive, how many did the model correctly label as such? That might be the level of detail that we need to get to initially to be really sure that we're confident the model is accurate. Or perhaps we're identifying parts of the organization where classification should not be used, i.e., we probably don't want to use this just yet to try and diagnose the specific health condition that this patient's got. Maybe for the time being, we want to just refrain from doing that. So we'd be creating specific standards for specific models in the process. So how do we capture impact? So I want to make it clear that in the world of AI agents, measuring impact is not an optional extra. I'll hold my hand up and say that I was probably slow, we should say, to capturing metrics and really evangelizing them in the world of RPA. It was very much number of bots or hours saved, and that just didn't tell the full story. So thank goodness we had a savior in Micah and Matt, who have come up with the automation impact metrics framework, which tells us exactly how customers should be thinking about capturing the value and the impact, not just for bots, but for automation in general. We've got some sessions coming up in Pathfinder, which the guys will be posting in the chat very soon, Pathfinder Summit, which I urge you to attend. So we should be thinking about setting the standards for how to measure business impact. So technical model performance, F1 score, or the confusion matrix, where confusion matrix is a 2x2 matrix showing you true positives, false negatives, true negatives. This is the sort of technical level you might need to get to in order to be confident to say that, yes, this is working as desired, or actually we need to optimize this model further. And of course, there'll be our very good business KPIs, errors avoided, time to process, data quality improvements, etc. And one thing to think about as well, agentic process automation could represent such a huge change to some business processing that you might want to think about doing some benchmarking or data capture prior to deploying automation. There could be nothing worse than deploying an absolutely world-class, flawless system and having nothing to compare it to, not being able to articulate just how much it's improved the world of customer support. Adoption enablement, so how would we evangelize the capability? So we should be thinking about how we're promoting this value and this capability to the wider organization. Remember, if you've done something which involves classification, it's at a high level such a generic skill, there are going to be parts of the organization other than the department you're working in that could be benefiting from that. So you should be thinking of a plan to promote this, sharing the success stories of implementing it, the business impact, the problems that it solved, even thinking about how it works as well. Doing this will go a huge way to making this capability work for the organization. So in summary, And finally, for that final transition of some final few flames in the chat, I'm going to go through, this is what we covered. So we went through the key features and capabilities of generative AI that leads to AI agents. So I covered autonomy. I mentioned that AI agents are autonomous, they're adaptable, and they have awareness. Three things that unfortunately our RPA brethren did not have. But we also covered the capabilities of generative AI, so those 8 skills. And you'll be seeing a lot of those, particularly when it comes to AI training camp as well. We covered how AI agents fit into new or existing automations. So I used the example of customer support. Equally, month end in the finance department, I think would be I say very exciting. It's probably not exciting, but an equally potentially big area for APA as well. And we highlighted how your existing automations could be leveraged as tools as part of these wider agentic approach. And I want to emphasize the fact that, remember, the bots you've built today will be hugely powerful as you begin progressing further into agentic process automation. We also covered how you can begin to identify process candidates for agents. So I gave that whole start small and start from the bottom up. So look at your existing automations, look at the outputs that they produce. If they're producing an Excel file or putting data into a system, you know somewhere someone's going to have to be making a decision off that data, or someone will be doing something with that. Find out what they're doing. Find out which out of the 8 generative AI capabilities they may be leveraging. Is inevitably going to be decision making in there somewhere, but it might be data transformation. Might be named entity recognition. Think about that. That's a great place to start in terms of working out where you could potentially pilot agentic process automation. We also talked about the longer term, so that how becoming more ambitious and focusing on a wider goal, such as closing 90% of support tickets in under 48 hours. I think if you start with something as bold and as brash as that, and ask yourself that question and brainstorm, how would we actually achieve that? And you worked out potentially some of the steps that would be needed to achieve that, you will inevitably come up with things such as, well, we're going to massively need to improve how we classify tickets, or we get more tickets than we've got people. Okay, where are the team getting stuck? That's a great potential use of process discovery to map that out, to find out where the team are spending the most time. Okay, that could be a great use case for agentic automation. And finally, you had an overview of the AI enablement framework to support you. So we covered AI capabilities across type, technology, talents, governance and standards, monitor and optimize, and adoption and enablement. That is very much the work and from the brilliant mind of Matt Stewart, and you can bet your bottom dollar we will be expanding on that massively come AI training camp in a couple of months' time. So we can't wait to share that with you. That was all I had. I've come under far quicker than I thought I would. I was worried I'd be right pressed up against the hour. So thank you for listening. I think we open it up now to some audience questions.
Hey, so there are no questions in the Ask the Speaker portal as of yet, but I wanted to, I think that might just be because of how well that presentation was delivered. Like the AI enablement framework that we're really excited to show you guys in a couple of months, I think it tells the story of how you need to set these things up deliberately, rather than how we've seen a lot of organizations kind of see a business problem and then sprinkle AI on top and hope for the best. That deliberate approach, specifically that slide that you had that broke down what work was being done and how it translated to agentic roles and the capabilities they used, I think that's probably the best visual that anyone has put out there in terms of AI and its uses. So there might be no questions just because you killed it. We'll go with that.
I mean, I will absolutely say that. And I see there's been lots of convo in the chat as well, so I will endeavor to catch up with that after. So, yeah, I think I remember us when we were putting this presentation together, Matt, just riffing on all the potential areas that exist for agentic process automation. We couldn't quite decide. I mean, we were potentially going to go with finance, but we thought it was probably a little bit too boring and not perhaps might divide the audience. So we settled on customer support. And when you share that slide about, let's think about all the AI, generative AI capabilities, and you break it down across those 8 skills. That for me, it was the most beautiful abstraction for how everyone can be thinking about using generative AI to break down any process. And yeah, for me, that was it. Like, yeah, absolutely. There is, it almost makes me laugh. I see these people share these huge tables on LinkedIn. Oh, here's some great ideas for, where you could deploy generative AI. And it's inevitably such a high level that you feel like you need to be a process expert in every single one of those to truly know where you would be deploying agentic process automation. But when you start from the bottom up, you think of the skills.
Yeah,
you don't need to be a process expert in anything. Where are you summarizing tickets, or where are you struggling to perhaps understand sentiment, or you need to make a decision?
It is so funny the way you mentioned that, the LinkedIn things that you talk about. It's, here's a list of things that your company does, and that's it. That was the entire value those posts added. Companies know they spend money on those processes. How are you helping them actually fix that problem? And it's like, you've got that top down, where can we add value? And that's that post. And then your cool animation, which again, great job on the animations.
Fire emojis.
The flip where once you've identified that high level process, looking at all of the pieces of work and how they align to what an AI capability is, that means you now know where my value is, and you know the building blocks to get there, and you build until it doesn't make sense to build anymore.
Yeah, exactly that. Exactly. Yeah. I think it's natural to be a little bit agentic process automation, yet another buzzword. But I couldn't be any more excited about what the potential is. And my prediction is that I think RPA will be seen as an essential tool for fitting into your agentic process automation framework. The 3 things that I mentioned, it's rules-based, it's structured data, etc. That is precisely why it's ideal. It's reliable. I onboarded a new customer 12 months ago to Automation Anywhere, and I was amazed at how little hoops we had to jump through. InfoSec pretty much didn't exist. The IT spinning up VMs for the bot runners almost didn't have to do it because it's tried and tested technology now. If I compare that to 10 years ago, oh my word, I felt it would have been taking years just to get things spun up. So because it's tried and tested, because IT and InfoSec can be confident that it's not going to go rogue, that's why it's ideal for being a tool. That, will it always do what it says it's going to do? Absolutely it will. So that's why I couldn't be more excited for how the existing work that you will have all worked so heavily on and the bot catalogs you'll have curated will still be relevant in 6, 12, 24, 36 months' time.
I have one comment for that, and then we did get a good question that I wanted to ask. But to what you're just talking about RPA and how, the comment you made, is RPA dead? I think RPA today now has more value than it did before, because the hardest part of RPA wasn't getting it to do what you wanted. That was the easy part. The hardest part was having it do what you wanted when you needed it to, because a single action at an org where you're clicking a button in a screen or updating something might be done by thousands of different people at your company for thousands of different reasons. But with RPA, you're deliberately building a specific flow. And the only time you're going to build an end-to-end automation is when it makes sense for the time it makes sense for that use case. So that same reusable piece of code is being wasted for 99% of where it's applicable. But with agentic automation, where you don't have to worry about building those deterministic paths, suddenly that tool is infinitely scalable. So I think there's a really big opportunity here for people to go back, make sure your tools are doing what they want, you're following good coding standards, and then once you adopt AI, I think you're gonna go. So let me ask this question that came in chat from Brian Thomas. What are some items that you had to not include due to time? Is there anything you really want to emphasize?
There was actually quite a lot, yeah. And it turns out I finished with 15 minutes spare, Brian, as well, so I probably could have included them. But I wanted to include how when I was in professional services, and equally in customer success as well, I would often do a lot of what we call process discovery workshops with customers. So we would have a we'd have a big room together with maybe 20 people from a part of the business, oftentimes back office like HR, finance. And before leading into these sessions, I would have sent them a link to some of the kind of grounding courses we have on automation anyway, about what is automation, what is RPA, what is it not. And what I found was you had to, before these workshops, say, no, it's not a real robot. No, it's not Arnold Schwarzenegger as Terminator sat next to you. It follows rules. No, it won't go rogue. No, it won't do anything. And, no, a full list of things.
I had the same thing. We had somebody ask what happens if someone steals it. And we thought they were talking about like hacking the code. And they thought, no, physically stealing the robot. So
yeah.
We've had those questions as well.
This is worth a session on Pathfinder and all the things we've heard over the years, because I've got some crackers. And I wanted to include, if I was running a workshop on agentic process automation, I don't think there wouldn't be any caveats at all. I think the limiting factor would probably be people's imagination. I think I'd be having to almost do the opposite. No, it can actually do this. No, it actually could make a decision. No, actually, if you've built a bot, it could decide to run that bot. And it could genuinely flag a customer who's really angry and recognize what they've done. So it's almost the complete opposite ends of the spectrum. So I wanted to try and find a way that I could kind of work that in, but in the end it didn't fit. But thank you, Brian. I found time to include that. But that was the big thing which sticks out.
Yeah, I like that part where you were saying, can it actually do that? And I think that's why distilling all of AI into those 8 categories that we put in there is so helpful. Because right now, for a lot of people, even if they're technical, AI kind of feels like a mystical black box. We hear about a business problem and we hear that you can solve it, but what it's actually doing to solve that problem is lost to a lot of people. Even if they're hands-on with it, they don't put it in an appropriate label or wrapper so that the next time they go to solve a similar problem, they've learned from it or they've taken those lessons away. And that is not going to work at organizations. If a company wants to know how this is working, what it's doing, how you've tested it, how you've controlled it, all those things, having these nice discrete labels on things that say, here's the information going in, here's the information coming out, here's how we did it. It makes it work, not just technically, but in an actual professional organization. Yeah, it was a great question. Let me see if there's any more come in. Brian is the only one that's asked questions so far, so appreciate that, Brian. We still have a large attendee list, and we haven't dropped off, so I hope that the conversation is still incredibly helpful for you. Ollie, could you go back to that very, very helpful visual slide that I think bankrupted Micah because of all the fire emojis? The one that had the broken out roles and display. Well,
I
early
gotta be
on.
honest, I think there was a few that bankrupted Micah. So let me see if I can find that.
Yeah. I think I want to leave that up on screen. It's the one with the work getting crossed out and the things getting mapped to the 3 agents.
Yeah, let me bring that up. Cool, just share that, Matt, if you can add that to the screen.
Yep. Yeah, this is the one we're driving. So that, this slide. I think that this one got quite a lot of comments in the chat and a lot of fire emojis, breaking the things down into what those categories are. And then the next one was how you actually crossed them off as you were adding the agents that had those features. I think those were the 2 most powerful slides that help conceptualize this. So we'll just let these stay up on screen. If there's any other questions, anything else that anyone wants to ask, feel free to ask it and we'll address it. We've got about 5 minutes left.
Yeah, and I mean, kind of going back to Brian's question, as I mentioned, there were some things that I wanted to do in finance as well. I mean, I'll always be biased towards finance because I spent so many years in a finance department, so have an innate knowledge about how it works. But I think there were numerous things around like month-end reporting that would just be ideal for AI agents. And I'm not just thinking about, say, that the production of month-end reports, but we'd probably spend almost a week, 7, maybe 8 days of a month doing what's called month end, where you're closing down the financial position, analyzing what's happened, writing commentary to then be able to give a narrative to the CFO, so that when he's in front of the board every month, he can explain just why such and such business unit has varied so much to plan. And it's always to plan, because of course so much of the narrative on a quarterly basis that goes out to shareholders is to plan. Shareholders will make decisions based on what the company says, and if you deviate from that, you may not look like you're reliable, or perhaps you can't anticipate the market, or you're just not particularly good. So that narrative was so important, but it took so long, and we had to be so detailed on that narrative. Like, why have things changed? How will you stop this from happening again? So it was a very intense and detailed 7 days, but ultimately it was in interpreting data. I would look at a financial output and sort of work out, okay, what were all the items that made up that variance? I would just go into SAP and run a query, but then I might have to use my experience, or kind of look historically at what's happened. Oh, of course that happened because it's December, and actually a lot of the business kind of shuts down. Typically we just know that there's a random patch in the middle of December where it's really quiet, and then it ramps up again. It's bizarre, but all of that stuff. I mean, we've got customer support in the middle. It could be a management accountant or even a financial accountant too. So they're the ones we deeply explored. But the parts of the business you guys know exceptionally well, I'm sure you could come up with a slide exactly like this with various different agents.
Yeah, I like the customer support role. Everyone's put in a ticket or done some level of troubleshooting for someone in their life, whether it's a mother who can't get her screen working, or it's a coworker who forgot how to do something. So it was either this, or my favorite to go to is always just ordering a pizza. Everyone's gone through that experience before. What toppings did I want? That's entity extraction. What am I calling for? Am I getting delivery? Am I getting pickup? Classification? You can do the same thing, but this makes sense more in a business context. The other one is just bad for our diets. So we did get another question. How can agentic AI help those back office financial professionals, the one who don't deal with tickets but data analysis? So Ali was just talking about that, and some of the words that he was using, I wanted to point out. He had to read through the statements and find what was important. That's extraction. He's extracting specific entities from there and putting them together. He had to look up information, historical information. That's not particularly generative AI. That would be like some kind of search feature, but making sense of that historical information is a form of summarization. So if you are summarizing historical data, now you've got context for a prompt. You've got current data that you've extracted from statements. You can tell that story together. So every single one of these use cases that we talk about, you can break down using those skills that we provided and tell that story of your business information. Because really everything that you do as a human to do this work is these types of skills. You're looking at something and determining, is this relevant or is this not relevant? So you're classifying it. You're pulling data out. That's extraction. You're distilling 50-page financial statements into paragraphs. That's summarization. You might have to turn it from the plain text that it's in into something that is in a table so that someone can read it, or create a chart. That's data transformation. You have to decide whether or not I need to report on this. If I need to report on this, how I want to structure it. That's all decision making, all based on context that you're pulling from other places. You're doing that as humans. And if you know how you do it as a human, these are instructions and context that you can provide to an AI agent to do the job, hopefully as effectively as a human. Most of the times, humans just win, but if you can get 99% of the work done and just have a person validate that the data is correct, you've saved as much time as it would have taken you, without having to risk anything going off the rails.
Yeah. Conscious of time, Logan, I'll just quickly say as well, another thing that popped into my head. I mentioned proactivity of agents as well. You get into the office and actually the agent says, oh, hey, I've detected that the variance for this month was significant. So I've prepared a journal which will update the budget for the rest of the year. That level of kind of foresight you would probably get from a junior accountant, maybe a good one, but that would be a great example of where you'd leverage it.
That's actually a fantastic point. Humans generally only work 8 to 10 hours a day, right? Whereas these agents, the second something happens, right? Like something could happen in the middle of the night that shakes up the market, shakes up your company. And when you wake up in the morning, having a full report on your desk with cited sources and everything, even if it's not perfect and it's 99% there, that's still incredibly valuable to anyone that's trying to do anything in the financial space. All right, we are slightly over time. I don't want anyone to lose their next session. So thank you, Ollie. This was great.
Thanks,
if you
Matt.
guys have any
Thanks,
questions
everyone.
for him, you can reach out. Follow him on LinkedIn. We'll be posting about AITC soon enough. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Cheers all.